The date is May 8th, 1984. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a 60-year-old actor named Tom Bosley is standing on a soundstage he has walked on hundreds of times before. Only this time is different. In a few seconds, he is going to do something no actor on this show has ever been allowed to do. He is going to stop pretending the camera isn't there. He is going to look directly into it and speak to millions of strangers as if they were sitting in his own living room. Nobody in that studio knows yet that this single moment, 11 words long, is about to become one of the most beloved farewells in television history, and that within weeks, the network that fought to keep it off the air would also be the one that quietly destroyed everything it meant. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to go back further, to a struggling New York stage actor who arrived in Los Angeles in 1973 with barely enough money to survive a month. Henry Winkler wasn't chasing stardom. He was chasing rent. He had no connections, no plan, just an audition for a minor character in a new sitcom about a simpler, warmer version of America. The role was written as comic filler, a leather-jacketed tough guy meant to fade into the background. But something happened the moment Winkler stepped into the room. He gave the character a heartbeat the script never asked for, a flicker of hesitation behind the confidence, a loneliness underneath the cool. Within a year, that small supporting role had become Arthur Fonzarelli, and Arthur Fonzarelli had become one of the most recognizable faces in the country. Children imitated the walk. Companies printed the jacket on lunchboxes. A snap of two fingers became a national in-joke. And underneath all of it, a man who once feared he'd never get another audition was quietly beginning to disappear inside a character that was never supposed to be bigger than he was. By 1974, Happy Days had already become something rare, a show that didn't just entertain people, it comforted them. For the next decade, it grew into a genuine cultural institution, a weekly ritual for families who tuned in not for plot twists, but for familiarity. The Cunninghams weren't fictional to the audience. They were the relatives who never missed a Tuesday. But by the early 80s, the warmth that had carried the show for so long was starting to fade. Ratings were slipping. The cast had grown up and grown apart. And Gary Marshall, the man who had built this entire world from nothing a decade earlier, understood a truth most networks refused to accept, that a beloved show doesn't just deserve a good beginning. It deserves a good ending. Marshall didn't want a clip show. He didn't want one last punchline to fade to black on. He wanted the finale, titled passages, to actually feel like family. A wedding for Joni and Chachi, a quiet redemption arc for Fonzie, one final night together in that familiar living room before the lights went out for good. But even that didn't feel like enough. Marshall wanted to do something television simply didn't do. He wanted to thank the audience directly, not through a character's dialogue, not through subtext, but by breaking the invisible wall between the story and the people watching it and speaking to them honestly one last time. So he wrote the line that would define the entire finale. As the Cunningham family gathered together on screen for what everyone understood was the final time, Howard Cunningham would turn away from the scene, look straight into the camera, and speak not to his television family, but to the real one on the other side of it. "Thank you all for being part of our family," he would say. "To Happy Days." ABC panicked the moment they read it. Breaking the fourth wall, executives argued, would shatter 11 years of carefully built illusion. It would confuse casual viewers. It was too big a risk for a show this valuable. Marshall refused to back down. This wasn't a cartoon ending on a gag, he told them. This was a story about real people who had grown up alongside a real audience. And that audience had more than earned an honest goodbye. After weeks of tense negotiation, the network finally relented, warning Marshall that if the moment fell flat, the failure would be his alone to answer for. It didn't fall flat. When the scene aired that night in May, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Viewers across the country wept. Critics who rarely softened for sitcoms called it one of the most sincere farewells network television had ever produced. For a few hours, everything Marshall had fought for felt completely justified. Happy Days had ended exactly the way it deserved, not with spectacle, but with gratitude. Millions of people went to bed that night, believing they had just witnessed the true, final chapter of a show they'd loved for over a decade. They hadn't. What almost nobody watching knew was that ABC had been sitting on a scheduling problem for months. The network had secured exclusive rights to broadcast the Winter Olympics from Sarajevo, a ratings windfall that came at a cost. Weeks of primetime real estate swallowed whole, bumping several shows, including Happy Days, off the air entirely. A normal network would have pushed the finale back until the schedule cleared. ABC didn't want to lose momentum heading into summer sweeps, so passages aired exactly on schedule in May. But that left a problem nobody had solved. Several completed episodes, fully filmed months earlier, had simply never made it to air because of the Olympic disruption. They couldn't be thrown away. Somewhere in a boardroom, someone decided on what seemed like a harmless fix. Let the finale air as planned. Quietly slipped the leftover episodes in later, as bonus content, after everyone had already said goodbye. On paper, it looked like simple efficiency. In practice, it became one of the most quietly devastating decisions in the show's history. Barely a month after millions of Americans had cried through Howard Cunningham's farewell, ABC did something the audience never saw coming. Without warning or explanation, the network began airing 5 previously unaired episodes in June of 1984. Fans who believed they had already said goodbye turned on their televisions expecting reruns, expecting silence, and instead found the Cunninghams alive, well, and going about ordinary sitcom business, as though the emotional ending they had just witnessed had never happened at all. One newspaper described it as watching a ghost, a family the country had genuinely mourned, smiling back from the screen, completely untouched by the goodbye that was supposed to mean everything. The backlash came fast. Letters flooded ABC. Critics accused the network of cheapening its own finale, of treating a beloved show like leftover inventory instead of a story that deserved to stay finished. And then, in September, came the moment that turned confusion into something closer to heartbreak. The actual final episode of Happy Days ever broadcast wasn't the wedding. It wasn't the tearful farewell. It was Fonzie, the character who had defined a decade of American television. Humiliated during a failed social club initiation, mocked in a plot with no emotional weight and no connection to anything that had come before. One of the most beloved figures television had ever produced didn't get to leave with dignity. He left on a punchline nobody had asked for. For Gary Marshall, the wound was personal in a way no ratings report could measure. He had spent weeks fighting ABC to protect one honest, human moment, and within a single season, the network had buried it under exactly the kind of hollow filler he'd spent 11 years trying to keep off his show. They buried the ending I fought for. He admitted afterward, a quiet, devastating line from a man who had just watched his life's work get undone by a scheduling convenience. For Henry Winkler, the damage went even deeper, and it had nothing to do with leftover episodes at all. The Fonz had made him one of the most recognizable men in America, and had also, slowly, made him disappear. Casting directors stopped seeing an actor named Henry Winkler. They saw a leather jacket. Audition after audition ended in rejection because nobody in the industry could imagine him as anything else. When the show finally ended, he expected relief. Instead, he described it as a sting. The strange, disorienting horror of waking up the next morning as a stranger to himself. Unsure who he even was without a character the world had spent 10 years convinced was actually him. It would take nearly 2 decades, a supporting role in Scream, a scene-stealing turn in Arrested Development, and finally an Emmy-winning performance in Barry in 2018, before Hollywood, and perhaps Winkler himself, fully accepted there had always been more to him than a catchphrase. The rest of the cast carried their own quiet aftershocks. Ron Howard walked away from acting almost entirely, channeling the chaos of that finale into a directing career that would one day win him an Oscar. Marion Ross kept working for decades, forever remembered for a single line of gratitude she never got to fully claim. Tom Bosley's death in 2010 reopened old wounds nationwide, with newspapers simply calling him the father who thanked a nation. And Aaron Moran, who had grown up on camera as Joni Cunningham, faced the harshest road of all, a canceled spin-off years of struggle, and an early death in 2017 that stands as a painful reminder of how quickly the warmth of fame can vanish once the cameras stop rolling. In the end, Happy Days never really got one ending. It got two, tangled together, competing for the last word. One was the ending Gary Marshall fought so hard to protect. A father thanking a nation, a family closing the door with love fully intact. The other was the ending ABC actually delivered. 5 forgotten episodes and a punchline, aired without ceremony, quietly erasing the goodbye millions of people had already cried through. Both endings are true. Both belong to the same 11 years. And decades later, the real question isn't which one was official. It's which one you still remember.